If I could get everybody to slip into their seats so we can see who's here, who's not here, and who we may need to move. Good morning, everybody. The committee will come to order. We're going to mark up today a total of 7 bills, all of which have my full support, and I'm grateful to the ranking member, the subcommittee chairman, and ranking members of each subcommittee, and all of the sponsors of today's legislation for their efforts to advance these important pieces of legislation through the committee. The CBO is still reviewing the bills on the agenda today, so we don't have final cost estimates. However, I assure you that any legislation advanced today will fully comply or be fully offset with all required protocols prior to any consideration on the floor. And since we have a very full agenda this morning, I'm going to forego any opening statement and yield to the ranking member, Ms. Brown, for any statements she may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will keep my remarks brief this morning since we have a number of bills before us. I am pleased that the measure before us this morning includes the legislation ideas of the number of the Democrats on this committee, including Mr. Liu and Mr. McNermott of our committee. I support the bill before us this morning, and I support the amendments that will be offered. And although I support H.R. 4591, the Department of Veterans Affairs Purchasing Healthcare Streamline and Modernization Act, I do have some concerns that I hope that we can address as we move forward with this bill. One of these concerns will be addressed by Mr. Takana amendment, which I hope we will all support. Mr. Takana amendment strike unnecessary language stating that the agreement under this legislation are not under the Office of the Federal Contract and Compliance Program of the Department of Labor. Secondly, I hope that we can work together to remove other language referring to Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Again, I think that this reference is unnecessary given the language in the rest of the bill. This bill provides authority to the VA that is necessary to provide better care. We should be clear that what we are doing is providing VA with the same authority provided Medicare, and that agreements are on the same footage as Medicare and Medicaid providers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. I now call up H.R. 4591. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 4591, to amend Title 38 United States Code to authorize the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to enter into agreements with certain health care providers to furnish hospital care, medical services, and extended care to veterans.
The bill has been circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. Members, H.R. 4591 would authorize the Department of Veterans Affairs for 5 years to enter into provider agreements with existing Medicare, Medicaid, state aging, or local disabled home providers to cover hospital care, medical services, or extended care, nursing home care. These provider agreements would be exempt from the federal acquisition regulation requirements administered by the VA Chief Business Office and require annual reporting to Congress. Provider agreements would last for 2 years, and following that would need to be affirmatively renewed. Prior to entering into a provider agreement, VA would be required to certify providers for quality assurance and assess risk for fraud, waste, and abuse, similar to current Medicare requirements. Reimbursement rates under these provider agreements would match Medicare rates to the greatest extent possible. However, exceptions to current Medicare rates would be allowed for Alaska and other special, highly rural areas. Circumstances under which VA would pay higher than Medicare rates would be determined by statistical health care cost data. As I think you could recall, the Choice Act granted VA provider agreement authority, which is being utilized under the larger third-party provider contracts. Since then, VA has repeatedly stated that larger provider agreement authority is the Department's top legislative priority. H.R. 4591 grants the authority that the Department is asking for, and most importantly, it creates a way forward for small providers, particularly those in rural areas who cannot compete as federal contractors, while including sufficient protections to ensure high-quality care and prevent against fraud, waste, and abuse. Is there any further discussion on H.R. 4591? Seeing none, at this point, the bill is now open for an amendment. Who seeks recognition? Mr. Takano.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk shall report.
Amendment to H.R. 4591, Department of Veterans Affairs Purchase Health Care Streamlining and Modernization Act.
I ask
Offered.
unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment in the nature of a substitute be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered. I now recognize Mr. Takano for 5 minutes to discuss his amendment to H.R. 4591.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment this morning strikes the provision in the bill that explicitly exempts provider agreements from the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs jurisdiction. As it stands, the language in the bill is redundant and sets a precedent for undermining important civil rights protections for all workers. The OFCCP was created in 1965 to ensure that the federal government does not do business with employers who discriminate. That is a solemn commitment that we made, and one that should not easily be taken back for the sake of expediency. The OFCCP provides enforcement and compliance assistance to ensure equal employment opportunity for all and to prevent discrimination in the workplace on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, disability, and even veteran status. I was surprised to learn about that last category. Yes, under the Vietnam-era Veterans Readjustment Assistance Act, the OFCCP is the agency responsible for preventing employment discrimination against veterans in the workforce. I am sure all of my colleagues will agree that helping veterans transition to civilian life and find meaningful employment after their service is one of our top priorities. Rolling back provisions that protect veterans, particularly those who are disabled as they apply for jobs and find employment, runs counter to that goal. At this point, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a letter from Secretary of Labor Tom Perez raising concerns with the OFCCP provision in the bill.
Without objection.
As the VA has attested, even if this language remained in the bill, many of the provider agreements they plan to enter into would fail to trigger OFCCP jurisdiction due to their size and scope. Additionally, other provisions in the bill stipulate that federal laws do not apply to Medicare providers, will not apply under the VA provider agreements either. Medicare providers are currently exempt from OFCCP. Providers who enter into agreements with VA under this legislation will be as well. For these reasons, the targeted OFCCP carve-out in paragraph C is redundant and instead sends a signal that this committee does not value the promise of equal employment opportunity for all. Furthermore, OFCCP requirements are hardly onerous and should not slow down or hamper the VA's ability to enter into these provider agreements. In fact, complying with OFCCP can be as simple as posting equal employment opportunity notices in the workplaces, making a non-discrimination statement in job announcements, and retaining employment records. These seem straightforward enough and are best practices that any business should have no trouble following. If this committee wishes to explicitly roll back decades of civil rights protections, we must have a compelling reason to do so. I have yet to hear the case that justifies this explicit provision in the bill. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Takano. I yield myself 5 minutes in opposition to Mr. Takano's amendment. And as my colleague has already said, that OFCCP regulations do not currently impact these individuals, but I just want to make sure that everybody here understands that the change, this bill doesn't change how they are currently treated. In fact, it makes sure that they stay exactly the same. And so I would bring to your attention that over the last year or so, the Secretary, the Deputy Secretary, and other leaders have repeatedly, strenuously stated, both on and off the record, that provider agreement authority is the Department's top legislative priority. In fact, almost every letter on any topic that the committee has received from VA since January has in fact included language urging the committee to expeditiously grant the Department request for provider agreement authority or risk jeopardizing the care that veterans receive from small providers across the country. That message has been echoed by veteran service organizations, healthcare advocacy groups, and many other individuals. VA and the other stakeholders have all argued that unless we, the Congress, provides relief to providers who are unable to meet onerous and, in VA's own words, excessive compliance burdens imposed by the Department of Labor, small providers across the country will stop accepting veteran patients. In response, I have introduced H.R. 4591. And as has already been entered into the record, late yesterday, the Department of Labor wrote the committee to express for the very first time concerns that this language does not include civil rights protections. Let me be clear, it is not my intention to absolve small providers who are treating veteran patients from protecting the civil rights of their employers. However, it is my intention to absolve those providers from complying with, again, in VA's own words, excessive reporting and auditing requirements that are not necessary to the provision of care and will result in fewer providers able and willing to treat the veterans of our nation. Now, VA is unlikely to express publicly, for political reasons. The department officials have already told me privately that they support the language as it is that excludes the DOL Office of Federal Contract Compliance programs from overseeing provider agreements. Additionally, I would also point out that the American Healthcare Association strongly supports the OFCCP exclusion and has rightly noted that the bill as written contains, and I quote, a very broad list of potential laws, i.e. that subject a person to civil or criminal penalties, end quote, that could almost include any laws, potentially including laws triggering OFCCP jurisdiction, end quote. In short, I believe that the bill as written meets the goals of increasing access to health care, similar to the Choice Act, without violating basic civil rights and equal hiring laws. And I want everyone to remember that this legislation specifically states that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits employment discrimination, applies. This is the relevant labor law. Is there any further discussion on Mr. Takano's amendment to H.R. 4591?
Chairman, if I might respond. Mr. Chairman, OFCCP requirements are not too burdensome. I want to reiterate that the OFCCP protections are not overly burdensome given the vital protections they offer workers, including our veterans. For small contractors, complying with OFCCP can be as simple, as I said in my statement, as posting equal opportunity, employment opportunity notices in the workplace, making a non-discrimination statement in job announcements, and retaining employment records. And I would also point out that these requirements will not slow down the process of retaining contractors. OFCCP places few upfront requirements on employers, especially small contractors. It should not slow down the process at all. As long as employers are committed to providing a workplace free of discrimination, they should have nothing to worry about. Streamlining provider agreements is more important. The idea that streamlining employer agreements is more important than protecting civil rights, I want to push back on that. If this committee wishes to explicitly roll back decades of civil rights protections, we do need a compelling reason to do so. The federal government made a solemn commitment in 1965 not to do business with employers who discriminate, and it should not be easily taken back for the sake of expediency. And I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Takano. Is there any, Mr. O'Rourke?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I am trying to make a decision on how to approach this amendment and the underlying bill, depending on what happens to this amendment. I would love to yield the remainder of my time back to you and Mr. Takano. Mr. Chairman, answer this question. What specifically is, and this is an honest question, I don't know the answer to it, what specifically is excessive about the reporting requirements? Do we know how much time this adds or other burdens that are connected to this? For you, and then for Mr. Takano, I would like to know if, as the chairman says, Title VII already protects civil rights. Is that not sufficient? Both honest questions, don't know the answers to them. Would love to get your
The first,
thoughts.
if I can, and then I'll yield to Mr. Tucano, the burdensome effects are from the VA. The VA has never, to my knowledge, in any of their correspondence with us, told us why they think it is overly burdensome. We've taken the secretary and the deputy at their word, but I can have staff look at it. It's going to be a little while before we actually vote on the finished product, but we'll see if we can get an answer for you.
Mr. O'Rourke, this amendment, seeks to protect under the the OFCCP these protections to our workers. It does not add any burden to the contracting process. Larger employers are definitely able to comply with this, and the smaller contracting firms are definitely provided enough flexibility and exemption and on the front end, so will not delay our ability to contract with these firms. That's all on the back end. So especially since this amendment extends that protection to also veterans as a class of people, I don't understand why this is, I think it's a very reasonable amendment.
I want to reclaim the time just to ask a follow-up question. It seems like the chairman is saying that these requirements, while burdensome according to the VA, and we're going to get detail on that, might also duplicate protections that are already contained within Title VII. That's my specific question. And again, if we don't have a detailed, specific answer to that, perhaps there's time through the remaining of today's markup to get that so that we can make an informed decision. So I will yield back to the chairman.
Thank you very much, and I don't know if we're going to get a definitive answer from VA during this markup. However, if I can, let me yield to Dr. Rowe, who has real-world experience, and maybe he can enlighten all of us on the burdensomeness of the regulation.
You know,
Dr. Rowe.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those protections, if you come into a small provider's office now, literally, we have a wall covered with post-ups about things we're supposed to post to notify people of something. What we're trying to do here is to, and look, you put one more burden on the small, these are not huge practices. Our practice can do this with 100 providers. We've got, well, I can tell somebody in the front office to go stick the thing up or comply. But if you're looking at a 1, 2, 3 person practice in urban America that's struggling to stay afloat, they want to help veterans, and yet you've asked them to do one more thing, and we're going to punish them some way if they don't hang a sticker up. It's just another thing that they don't have a compliance office to do all these things. And I think the protections are there. Look, discrimination is illegal in this country now, and I think what we're trying to do is to expand coverage for veterans. And I think it just gives another reason why a small practice would decide, hey, I'm not going to do this. I yield back.
Ms. Brown.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I feel at this point I need to do a disclaimer here because I was never in an informal meeting with the VA when they indicated to me that they were going to do away with civil rights provisions. So I want to be clear on that. And I really thought that everything had been worked out on this particular bill that I want to be very supportive of. But I could not be supportive of doing away with provisions, the civil rights provisions from 1965, because I do know that discrimination still exists. So I will yield to the remainder of my time to.
In response to my good friend from Tennessee.
Kano, I apologize. Time has expired. It was on Mr. O'Rourke's time.
Oh, I was asking for 5 minutes.
I apologize.
You weren't giving me his time.
No, yes, you were on.
I was trying to get my own time.
Mr. Waltz, you're recognized.
I request time, and I yield to Mr. Tucano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Waltz, for yielding time. I just want to, respond to my good friend of Tennessee, from Tennessee. I just want to bear in mind that that under the terms of the burden of OFCCP jurisdiction, all employers with 15 or more employees, including federal contractors, are subject to Title VII and EEOC jurisdiction. The Commission does not require employees to create any records, but to the extent that employers make or use employment records, such as applications, terminations, job descriptions, et cetera, the EEOC regulations require that employers preserve those records at least for 1 year. So large employers already do this as a practice, but the small employers of 15 or less are not. And this amendment does not add any additional burden on those small providers. So I would say that, you know, what's also at stake here are the protections we have in place for veterans as a class of people. And I don't understand why, without the onerous burdens that there are no onerous burdens that this amendment puts forward.
Thank you very much.
Could I reclaim my time, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, you may.
Could someone clarify for me, we're having the discussion on Title VII. Does Title VII, the way we're interpreting it, doesn't explicitly protect our LGBT citizens in this? And is that correct? That there is no clarification on that in Title VII?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I yield back to Mr. Takano.
Yes,
Can I do that?
Yes, you can. Yes.
Mr.
I didn't
Walsh,
know the rules.
I think the gentleman from Minnesota, yes, that is also what is at stake here. The OFCCP is the only teeth, that is the only mechanism we have to protect LGBT workers, and not covered under Title VII. So that is also at issue here.
Mr. Waltz, do you yield back? All right. Ms. Brown, do you need, I cut you off a minute ago, and I would yield 5 minutes if necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your kindness. I thought I was very clear that maybe there was an informal meeting, but I wasn't present because I would not have agreed to give 1965 voting rights provisions away under no circumstances. Then I would yield the rest of my time to Mr. Takano. And I had hoped that we had worked out this provision, Mr. Chairman.
If the gentlelady will yield.
Yes, yes.
And you can freeze the clock if
Freeze
you
it.
will. We have worked out. I do not think that this violates anybody's civil rights. I don't believe the intent, I have already stated that, is not to violate anybody's civil rights. Is in regard to the question of Mr. Waltz, the LGBT issue, while it is not explicit in Title VII, it has been interpreted that way, and that is where I assume we are at this point. Ms. Brown, to let you know that there has been no secret private meeting with the VA. What I'm saying is, and I will also say that they never at any time have said that they wanted to remove civil rights protections. So that is not at all what I'm saying, because I don't believe this legislation does that. What they have said is they want to remove the onerous, burdensome reporting requirements, their terms, not mine, from the small provider agreements in trying to put this together. And again, what we're talking about is the very small group. So now, back to Ms. Brown, or Mr. Takano, whoever.
Yeah, Mr. Takano.
Thank you, Madam Ranking Member. I just want to reiterate that the Secretary of Labor has raised serious questions, as have major civil rights groups, and I think the question at hand is the bad precedent this sets. I would urge my Republican colleagues to reconsider or to consider supporting the amendment because it does not add any additional burdens to the process and does not delay the contracting we need to do. But not supporting the amendment does set a bad precedent of pulling back civil rights protections unnecessarily, and we should only do that if there is a very, very compelling reason, and there's not a compelling reason to do so in this case.
Would you yield? Would you explain to me what veterans how this could affect veterans being served at these different facilities.
Well, it's not about it's about the veterans who work for the contractors. We want to make sure that anybody that the federal government contracts with, any employer, is an equal opportunity employer and is affording veterans full employment rights. The agency involved here is significant, and as Mr. Walls pointed out, also it's the OFCCP is the only agency that is able to extend that sort of protection to LGBT employees as well.
Would you yield? One of the discussions is veterans is having a hard time finding employment, and this would be an opportunity to work with small businesses with employment. So I definitely would have some concerns about any kind of discrimination against veterans. And are you saying this is the only?
Yes, under the Veterans Readjustment Act, the OFCCP is the agency. It is the agency responsible for preventing employment discrimination against veterans in the workplace. So it is not redundant in this case. Title VII is not enough protection for our veterans. We need the OFCCP to be involved, and we don't need to exempt them a carve out in this particular bill, and that's what my amendment addresses.
If the gentleman would yield.
I do yield, Mr. Chairman.
A question to you, because, and again, we're not talking about the large providers. We're talking about the very small providers now, and small providers that participate in Medicare now are not subject to OFCCP regulation. So there already is a carve-out. There's already a carve-out for TRICARE. There's already a carve-out within the CHOICE program. What we're trying to do is we collapse all these provider agreements down into a single seamless system, which is what the department is trying to do, that we maintain a little bit of consistency as we go through there. And I would take exception to one of your statements saying that if we choose to support the bill and oppose your amendment, then we are in favor of rolling back civil rights. That's your opinion. That's not law. That's not fact. And my opinion is this bill doesn't do that. So again, I mean, we are district. We want to achieve the same thing. I know that. I believe that this is the way that the department would like it to be done. And so we're moving forward. And as it moves out of this committee, we will certainly have other opportunities to discuss it. But I just wanted to say I appreciate.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I have no intention of impugning you or any of the majority. I don't believe that any of you have that in your heart or your minds. But in fact, the OFCCP does have specific responsibility under the Veterans Era Readjustment Assistance Act. It is the only agency that also can address discrimination against LGBT employment opportunities, and therefore, not adopting an amendment would be a precedent. We would set a precedent of reducing the protection for those potential employees at these contractors. So that's and I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. And again, we will agree to disagree on this point, because I don't believe so, and I believe that this issue is already in place in other areas within our federal government. We're not doing something new and groundbreaking. We may be at the department, but we're not within the federal government. So is there any other discussion? Dr. Benishek.
I hate to bring this along further, but I have actually tried to enter into a contract with the VA, as a provider, and it's very, very onerous to get into a contract with the VA. As a matter of fact, I didn't do it because it was too onerous. And, I ended up working for the VA in a fee-for-service, which is a different category of employee. But the contracting is horrible. It's back and forth, reviewed by somebody far away. It takes forever. And, I don't want to, in my practice, we don't discriminate. There's lots of laws that make sure that we don't do that, in our practice. But in a way of trying to ease the burden of the VA into getting people into the VA that will actually take care of veterans and get providers to participate with the VA is the goal of this. And believe me, in my district, we have CBOCs that don't have physicians. Because they don't want to work for the VA because it takes a year to get a job. I mean, they are trying to make it easier to get a job or contract with the VA. And if the VA is telling us this would make it easier, we need to get providers to provide care for veterans. And you know, I'm a sincere effort to do that. It was very difficult. So I'll yield back the remainder of my time.
I have a question. I understand that contracting with the VA is very difficult, and we're trying to work to streamline it. But when we look at Medicaid and Medicare, I really think that they should include the veterans piece in reimbursement. And the problems that the physicians have been telling me, the problem that they have is not getting their money timely. That's the complaint I have.
Well, that's one of the problems.
No,
but
that's
this
the
is another
major problem that
Well,
people.
I'm a doctor that worked for the VA. I'm telling you.
Yes.
They paid me on time, but to get there, it's not easy. I mean, I gave up on the contracting process because there's too onerous. There's too much risk to your practice because if they come after you, they got lawyers, and it's people don't want to get into those kind of relationships where they got government lawyers after them that you can't defend yourself for some accusation that you just can't afford to defend. And it's very difficult, and people tend to hesitate because they don't want to get into a situation where they got the federal government lawyers after them for something that they don't even, understand. And, I live and work in a small town. We have small practice. We're trying to help veterans. But when you're taking your whole life at risk to do it, it makes you not want to do it.
Well, I think, I yield back.
I'll yield back.
Any other comments on Mr. Takano's amendment?
I have a comment.
Dr. Ruiz.
And the question is to reiterate, is there any additional work that doctors in big towns, small towns, VA, private practice, public practice, academic institutions have to do with your amendment? Is there a form they got to write? Is there what? Or
Well, Dr. Rees, I just want to reiterate, I sympathize with the concerns that Dr. Benishek has raised about providers and the difficulty, but it should be explicitly understood that under a variety of other layers of existing policy, small providers are provided an exemption. The exemption language that I'm trying to address is redundant. It does not change the fact that small providers are going to be exempted from onerous burdens, and it does not add to their burdens.
so there's no additional action maybe other than saving records for a year?
But what significant? No, not even that. I mean, the larger contractors are required to do that anyway.
So there's no additional action. That's what you're saying.
There's no additional action. The main issue here is the OFCCP's reach. They're the only agency that got the enforcement teeth to go after potential contractors who discriminate, who do not do enough to protect veterans as a.
So it adds a protective layer for the veteran. If
For veterans and
for veterans, if they're being discriminated because they're veterans, but it adds no further additional work by small providers.
It does not.
Okay, so as a physician, if it doesn't change practice and if it actually adds benefit to the veteran, well, hold on.
Go ahead.
If as a physician, if it doesn't add to your burden or workload and actually adds more protection for your patients, then I would actually say it would be a good idea, because if we're going to be veteran-centered and protect veterans and protect our patients in whatever we do, when it doesn't compromise our care, when it doesn't add burdens to our care for veterans, then I don't see what the big deal is here.
Dr. Reeves, would you yield?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think what the carve-out is already there in a small practice for Medicare patients and Medicaid patients. And there are requirements. In other words, at your office, now you didn't have to do this because you worked in an emergency room, somebody did it for you. But when you run your practice, you have to post all these things if there's a different requirement for, let's say, and this is to protect veterans in work discrimination, not in patients.
When you
So-
say post, you mean
Yeah,
literally
but
put
look, if you've been
a
in my office,
flyer
you can
on
see
your...
a wall there that's got stuff stuck on it about hourly wage and all kinds of things.
And is that mandatory under this?
It would be.
So,
You have to post those things.
so
'cause
the
it's
burden-
required by the Department of Labor.
So then
to
the
do it.
burden, therefore, is
It's
to
administrative.
hang one certificate on the wall.
I don't know how many you got to hang, but I got a wall full of them now if you want to come read them.
Well, they're, you can't find them buried in.
So
they
now-
can't. You know, he's got all his academic achievements and
Oh, that stuff I'm not worried about. Nobody
awards
reads
and all that
anyway.
stuff.
But if you've seen all the EEOC, the things you have to post, and it's an employer. And so now you've got to figure out, you could be at a Department of Labor, could come in if you didn't have that posted and fine you for that because you've violated the law. And that's what Dr. Benishek was talking about. I yield back to you.
Okay, so, I mean, under this, do they have to post a piece of paper on the wall?
Yeah,
And so,
the requirement could be simply,
and so if we're clear though, in terms of the burdens, so that we all get a perspective on this, the burden would be putting a notice on a wall.
Dr. Rui.
And how often does that, we
Would you
have to
yield
do
for a
that?
second, please?
Yes, sir.
If the VA comes in and says that they call it, I think that in the words of the chairman, excessive or burdensome, it's got to be more than just stapling something to the wall. Here you have a disagreement between the Department of
Well,
Labor
you
and
know,
the Department of Veterans Affairs.
hold on one second.
I'm going to side with Veterans Affairs. They aren't going to go against
Well, Mr.
veterans.
Chairman, we
yield back.
don't get information that we want, that you have requested, because they say it's excessive and burdensome. So I have little concern as to what they consider excessive or burdensome, because they use that to not comply with the requests and the actions that our chairman on multiple occasions asked them to do. So I have little concern about whether they say it's excessive or burdensome. Of course, I yield back my time.
Okay, let's kind of bring this all in for a landing.
yeah.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask one more clarification? Not one more? Quick, and it's a question. Is there a difference between a provider agreement and a contract? Because we're talking provider agreements, which changes the way. Is that correct?
Yes, there is.
And that matters, correct?
Significant difference, yeah.
Okay.
I
And are
mean,
we
these
conflating
folk-
the two when we're talking this?
These folks are not contractors today for a reason, because of the
Right.
onerous requirements for them to become contractors with the department. That's what we're trying to fix. Granted, there
But the
may-
way I understand this, what Mr. Decano's saying is they will be provider agreements, so they may not actually have to post anything, Dr. Rowe, the way this works, the way I understand it. They may not actually have to do this because it's not a contract, it's a provider agreement. Correct?
Dr. Rowe.
Gentlemen, yield. I think if you're looking, as Dr. Benishek was saying, at worrying about breaking a federal law, you're going to go overboard.
Yeah, I agree.
In making sure. I mean, you're not going to take a chance with a 3 or 4
Fair
person
enough.
practice. You're going to comply, and you're going to have somebody in your office. And Medicare and Medicaid are different than having a VA provider agreement. That's different than a contract. It's maddening. And then, and Dr. Ruiz knows this. We then got to have the EMR and all. It's not just one thing. It's just a pyramid of things that providers are required to do now that they didn't 25 years ago. And look, nobody in this room, not anybody in this room, wants to discriminate against a veteran. That's not what we're trying to do.
And I don't think anybody wants to add onerous requirements to providers who want to go. That's why I think we have a lot of agreement here. We're just trying to reach that middle ground. I think there's a fear on the civil rights piece that anything perceived as turning back the clock in any way, of course, brings up concerns, but I don't want to minimize, because I believe it. When Dr. Benishek tells me that, I know it's true, and I don't want to minimize. So that's why I asked. I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Let's go ahead and move forward with continued discussion. And I think Dr. Rowe has a unanimous consent that is outside the scope of what we've been discussing. But Dr. Rowe, you're recognized for unanimous consent request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to offer an amendment that I did not timely file, but which was circulated in advance.
Hearing no objections, so ordered. The clerk shall report.
Amendment to H.R. 4591, Department of Veterans Affairs Purchase Health Care Streamlining and Modernization Act, offered by Mr. Rowe of Tennessee.
I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of the amendment be dispensed with. Hearing no objections, so ordered. And I recognize Dr. Rowe for 5 minutes to discuss his amendment to H.R. 4591.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment is very simple. In fact, I'm not even sure why I should be having to submit this amendment for consideration. The amendment reiterates that the Department of Veterans Affairs is required by law to process payments to non-VA providers in a timely manner, as Ms. Brown was saying just a minute ago, whether offering care to VA patients via choice, PC3, or any other current forms of outside care. Independent or small providers in rural America and in urban America in small group practices literally cannot keep their doors open if they don't get paid for the work they do. And I'll give you an example at home. We have a friend of mine who is a dentist who retired from his dental practice and decided he wanted to open his dental practice back up just to see veterans. That's all he was going to see. And so he did and developed a nice practice. And right now, one of the problems that you have at the VA is finding a dentist to see patients. So what did the VA do? They didn't pay this man. And so he had expenses, and he had his technicians and his equipment and his rent and all that. And so he's got to close his doors because they will not pay him in a timely fashion. And there needs to be, I think, if we sign this contract, and I'm going to support the chairman's bill, but I want to see a penalty. Dr. Ruiz just stated this a minute ago. I want to see a penalty if the VA doesn't pay in a timely manner. There's nothing in here to punish them if they don't pay. It can be business as usual. We can go ahead and have all of this easy agreement we've been talking about, and then we'll be up here. Every one of us will be back in our district. Ms. Brown will be back in Florida, and some doctor or provider will be in her office saying, I can't get paid. And there's no penalty for them if they don't do it. So I think we need, and we'll end up right back where we were. So, Mr. Chairman, I would like to see as we move this forward to put some teeth in this so that those providers, I don't know whether it's 150% of Medicare if the VA files up and doesn't pay a timely claim that's properly filed. I think we have to do that. Otherwise, I promise you, you'll be sitting here a year from now and hearing the same story again. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rowe. I will be supporting his very good amendment. Let me also say that this is not just regarding choice. There's been a conflation out there that the choice is causing problems as it relates to payment. It's across the board. We all know that at the VA, and so I think that this is moving in the right direction. Ms. Brown?
Yeah, I do have a quick question. Is this a provider, or is this a contract, one? And two, when you say timely, if the VA, you got prior approval for that particular patient prior to that person receiving that service. So when you say timely, are we talking about 2 weeks, 30 days, or 6 months? You need some definition of timely.
I can make it very easy for you, 30
Okay.
days.
Okay.
And I want to point something else out that I'll just take just a minute here to do. I've looked at this choice program we put together in a bipartisan way, and I think every one of us were sincere. And it isn't working. And why isn't it working? And one of the things we could do right now to make it work is when a patient comes in, and this is the way you have to look at the choice program or outside VA care. Think of the VA as an employer, as I do. When I was the mayor of Johnson City, we had a self-insured plan. You had an insurance policy, and we knew what doctors were on that policy, and you knew where you could go. That should be exactly what a veteran has when they go in and see the doctor. If they can't get care outside, let's say they need to see a dermatologist. When they walk out the door of the VA that day and they need to see Dr. Jones, who's a dermatologist, why isn't that appointment made right then? If that provider is a VA provider and the Tri-West already has all these provider networks out there set up, why do you have to go to Tri-West to get your appointment? No one in this room calls Blue Cross and Blue Shield when they go see their doctor. The doctor says, they look at your contract, you know exactly your health insurance plan, you know exactly what it provides for, you know exactly what providers are there, and you go up to the front desk and the receptionist said, Mr. Rowe or Dr. Rowe, do you want me to make your appointment today? No, I've got to check my schedule, I'll make it myself. Why don't veterans do that? Why do you have to go through this third party to get a doctor's appointment? and you know exactly what providers are there. It's already set up. You know what benefits you have. We could get a booklet for them so they could read it and understand it. That would simplify this tremendously.
Dr. Rowe, this is the way we set it up. So now, if you want to change it, then you need to change it.
I don't think we set it up this way.
Oh, yeah, we did.
I think I think what happened, Ms. Brown.
Yeah, but we gave them the authority, and so, but we were involved. I mean, we're guilty too. We were involved in this third party because I've had them in several times. I've had meetings with both of the third parties and discuss how we can make it work. But part of the concern is that if a veteran, let's say, can go to a dermatologist, the VA approve it, and then that's we can make sure that they get their reimbursement. So it's no reason why, or is it some paperwork that dermatologists got to give back to the VA before they get paid?
No, I'm talking about two different things. Prompt payment is different than making the appointment. Prompt payment is the VA has a properly filed claim. They should send the money out.
That's right. Because they have upfront said that you could go for this treatment.
That's right. So that ought to be done. That's a different issue than getting your appointment. What we're hearing, look, I met a veteran this past Monday before I came back that had 4 calls from Tri-West to try to set up an appointment. And this man was short of breath. He had a cardiac problem. I'm thinking, our offices shouldn't be the ones that are making health care appointments for people. That should be and that is so simple to do. When you see your doctor at the VA and you walk to the front desk to check out, you know whether you qualify or not. The doctor said you need to see this person. Why didn't that phone call get made and that doctor's appointment made? And Tri-West is simply a third-party administrator. That's all they are. They've already set the network up. They don't need to be involved in any of that. And the VA caused all that confusion. I yield back, Mr.
Thank you very much. Dr. Winstrup.
Just for clarity, if I could, under this, the VA has the ability or authority to contract out to a private entity to do their claims processing. Would that be correct?
That's what Tri-West is, yes.
And they can take bids on that and take it outside the VA to get it done in a hopefully better fashion. Thank you.
Any further discussion on Dr. Rowe's amendment? As previously discussed, I'm going to be supporting the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment to H.R. 4591 will say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment to H.R. 4591 is agreed to. And if I can, real quick, I understand that a lot of you have been contacted in the last 24 hours by those who are concerned that the $11 million cap in H.R. 4591 is too low for skilled nursing home facilities. That cap was set at $11 million to match the Small Business Administration criteria, which defines offices of physicians as small if they have an annual revenue under $11 million. It was intended to encourage the appropriate use of this new authority. However, I do understand that the cap may have had some unintended negative consequences for extended care facilities. And in light of that, I would ask unanimous consent to offer an amendment to raise the cap to $27.5 million for skilled nursing facilities which match the SBA criteria for skilled nursing home facilities. Without objection, so ordered, and I have an amendment at the desk. The clerk shall report.
Amendment to H.R. 4591 offered by Mr. Miller of Florida. Page 3, line 17, insert before the period the following, quote, or with respect to a provider that is a nursing care facility, skilled nursing facility.
I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of the amendment be dispensed with without objection, so ordered. Once again, members, this amendment would raise the cap for skilled nursing facilities to $27.5 million. Is there any further discussion on my amendment?
Just one point of clarification.
Dr. Rowe.
And this is, when we look at the 11 million for small practices, is this individual doctor or the whole group? It's whole office, okay, that's all I need to know.
Would be the provider office.
I want to thank the
Costello.
chairman for his amendment and for working with those of us who relayed concerns to him. Yield back.
Okay, all those in favor of the amendment to H.R. 4591 will say aye. Aye. All those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment to H.R. 4591 is agreed to. And since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on, that's where I'm going, occurs on Representative Takano's amendment on H.R. 4591. As previously discussed, I am going to be opposing the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment to H.R. 4591 will say aye. Aye. And all those opposed will say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The Takano amendment to H.R. 4591 is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Brown.
I think we want a roll call vote.
Okay, I was informed you wouldn't be asking for a roll call vote, but a roll call vote has been requested. Clerk, call the roll.
Chairman Miller.
No.
Chairman Miller votes no. Mr. Lamborn. Mr. Lamborn votes no. Mr. Bilirakis. Mr. Bilirakis votes no. Dr. Rowe. Dr. Rowe votes no. Dr. Benishek.
Y'all got to get.
Dr. Benishek votes no. Mr. Huelskamp. Mr. Huelskamp votes no. Mr. Kaufman. Mr. Kaufman votes no. Dr. Wenstrup. Dr. Wenstrup votes no. Ms. Walorski. Ms. Walorski votes no. Dr. Abraham. Dr. Abraham votes no. Mr. Zeldin. Mr. Zeldin votes no. Mr. Costello.
No.
Mr. Costello votes no. Ms. Radewagen. Mr. Bost.
No.
Mr. Bost votes no. Ranking Member Brown.
Yes.
Ranking Member votes yes. Mr. Takano.
Aye.
Mr. Takano votes aye. Ms. Brownlee? Ms. Brownlee votes aye. Ms. Titus? Ms. Titus votes aye. Dr. Ruiz? Yes. Dr. Ruiz votes yes. Ms. Custer?
Yes.
Ms. Custer votes yes. Mr. O'Rourke? Mr. O'Rourke votes aye. Ms. Rice? Ms. Rice votes aye. Mr. Waltz? Mr. Waltz votes aye. Mr. McNerney? Mr. McNerney votes aye. Mr. Chairman, the vote is 10 yes, 13 no.
And so the amendment fails.
Mr. Chairman, on the amendment, I am hoping as we move this great bill toward the floor, that the issues that we are discussing here, that we can work it out, because this is a great bill that really does not need the divided house on this particular issue. So with that, I'm hoping as we go toward the floor that we will work on these issues that's very important to the civil rights community and others.
I thank you for your comments. And again, I don't believe that there is any question as to how everybody feels about the Civil Rights Act. There is no attempt by those that voted against the amendment. I think Mr. Takano has even said that he does not believe that that's the intent of those that voted against it, but we can continue the dialogue as we move towards the floor.
One last thing, I think it would be good if we could get the VA and the Department of Labor to have some discussion as to what, you know, how we should move forward in addition.
I think the Department of Labor has made it very clear, and I would also tell you that in my opening comments, I also said that I doubt seriously that the department will publicly endorse the language that we are voting on today, but I can assure you that's what has been asked for.
Oh, not with me, let me just say that. So I wasn't in that room.
Okay, very good. Thank you. The question now occurs on passage of H.R. 4591 as amended. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. H.R. 4591 is amended, is agreed to, and I now recognize Ranking Member Brown for a motion on reporting H.R. 4591 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 4591 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to, and H.R. 4591 as amended is reported favorably to the full House. And as Ms. Brown has requested, and there is continued discussion, we will work with everybody in our normal bipartisan fashion to try to come to some resolution as it comes to the floor. I now call up H.R. 4336, and the clerk shall report.
H.R. 4336, to amend Title 38 United States Code to provide for the burial of cremated remains of persons who served as Women's
The
Air
bill has
Force.
been circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules and without objection. The first reading is dispensed with, and the bill is now open for an amendment at any point. Does anybody seek recognition for the amendment? Dr. Abraham.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute at the desk.
The clerk shall report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4336, offered by Dr. Abraham of Louisiana.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment in the nature of a substitute be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered, and I recognize Dr. Abraham now for 5 minutes to discuss his amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4336.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I urge my colleagues to support this amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4336. I am proud to be a co-sponsor of H.R. 4336, which was introduced by Representative McSally. As introduced, H.R. 4336 would allow Women's Air Force Service Pilots, or WASP, to be interned at Arlington National Cemetery if their families so choose. The WASP is one of the civilian groups, which include the Merchant Mariners, that have been recognized as active duty designees by the Congress or the Secretary of Defense. This amendment in the nature of a substitute would allow all current active duty designees to be interned at Arlington National Cemetery. Mr. Chairman, I again urge my colleagues to support H.R. 4336 and the amendment in the nature of a substitute. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Abraham. I have your you have my full support on your amendment, and would ask if there's any other discussion on Dr. Abraham's amendment in the nature of substitute. Anybody else seek recognition for offering an amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk shall report Ms. Brown's amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4336, offered by
I
Ms.
ask
Brown.
unanimous consent that further reading of the ranking member's amendment to the amendment of the substitute to H.R. 4336 be dispensed with, and hearing no objection, so ordered. I recognize Ranking Member Brown for 5 minutes to discuss her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As of January 2016, there are fewer than 100,000 resting places available at the Arlington National Cemetery. As we all know, Arlington National Cemetery is the most prestigious family resting place for those who have served our nation. Since opening in 1864, more than 150 years ago, over 400,000 men and women have been buried there. These brave servicemen have served in every conflict since the Civil War. With more than 20 million living veterans, we expect the cemetery to close for burial within the next few decades. Expanding eligibility for the groups in this bill, a proposal in any other bill, will cause this amount to greatly decrease. There is no doubt the individuals in this bill are deserving of a place of honor. However, we owe it to this nation and to the veterans of future conflicts to begin the conversation and ask ourselves the tough questions. With 95,000 resting places available, what are our expansion opportunities, and how do we ensure that Arlington maintains its unique meaning in our nation? My amendment seeks to begin this discussion by asking the Secretary of Defense to provide opportunities and options continue to keep Arlington National Cemetery open well into the future. I'm also asking for assessment for long-term Arlington National Cemetery will continue to remain open given the current expected rate of interment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown, for, I think, a very timely and important amendment. I am going to be supporting it and would ask if there's any other discussion on Ms. Brown's amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4336. Okay, the question now occurs on Ms. Brown's amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4336. And as previously discussed, I am going to be supporting the amendment. So all those in favor of the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4336 will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4336 is agreed to. The question now occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4336 as amended. All those in favor of the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4336 as amended will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4336 as amended is agreed to, and the question now occurs on passage of H.R. 4336 as amended. All those in favor will say on the vote. We're in the vote now, but please.
Thank you. I thought you would call for comments before the vote. I'm sorry. Thank you for bringing up this bill. I just wanted to comment a little about the details of the WASPs who are included in the bill. I was pleased to partner with Ms. McSally to introduce it. We forget about the WASPs. That's the Women Air Force Service pilots. They trained just like the men. They flew the flights in World War II. In fact, over 60 million miles were flown by the WASP and over 12,000 aircraft, and 38 WASP actually died serving our country. Now, originally, during their service, they were denied access to veterans benefits. That changed in 1977, and they were given full veteran status. Unfortunately, their right to be buried at Arlington Cemetery was taken away in 2009, and that meant that the 115 living WASP could not have the right to be buried there, which they had so bravely earned. So I thank my colleagues for considering this, viewing it positively. I support it strongly, and I accept the amendments that have been offered to it. And I thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, Ms. Titus. And I would also say that Ms. Titus and Ms. McSally have worked together diligently on the issue, and it has been expanded from just the WASP issue to the 35 groups out there that are negatively impacted by the current ruling. So I think this is an excellent bill for each and every one of us to support. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 4336 as amended is agreed to. And I recognize Ranking Member Brown for a motion on supporting H.R. 4336 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 4336 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to, and H.R. 4336 as amended is reported favorably to the full House. And I now call up H.R. 4063. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 4063, to improve the use by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs of opioids in treating veterans, to improve patient advocacy by
The
the
bill
Secretary.
has been circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules, and without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bill is now open for amendment at any point. Who seeks recognition for the purposes of offering an amendment? Mr. Bilirakis, you're recognized. Clerk,
Thank you, Mr.
excuse me.
Chairman. I appreciate it. I have an amendment at the desk.
clerk shall
Amendment
report.
in the nature of a substitute.
The clerk shall report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4063 offered by Mr. Bilirakis of Florida.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment in the nature of a substitute be dispensed with, and hearing no objection, it's so ordered. I recognize Mr. Bilirakis for 5 minutes to discuss his amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4063. Mr. Bilirakis, you're
Thank you,
recognized.
Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I'm pleased that my bill promoting responsible opioid management and incorporating scientific expertise act, or the Jason Simkowski Act, the Promise Act, was included in today's market. I appreciate it so much. The amendment I'm offering today seeks to strike the right balance to combat the epidemic of overprescribing of opioids while not restricting access to patients when appropriate for their treatment plan. An advisory committee will be comprised no later than 120 days after the date of enactment of this legislation. This committee will conduct a thorough review of current DoD VA clinical guidelines available to date and examine whether such guidelines should include the recommendations outlined in this bill. After 1 year of enactment, the committee, in consultation with the VA DoD Management of Opioid Therapy for Chronic Pain Working Group, will update recommendations to such guidelines if appropriate and necessary. Veterans are a high-risk population for prescription misuse and abuse, and unfortunately a significant risk of depression and suicide. One veteran patient, Marine Corporal Jason Simkowski, died due to mixed drug toxicity during his time in an outpatient center at the Toma, Wisconsin VA Medical Center. This legislation will help prevent such tragedies, and I've spoken to the family, and they're supportive of this bill. Statistics have shown more than half of VA male primary care patients report chronic pain when returning home from their service to this great nation. Additionally, the female veteran population is experiencing increases in chronic pain, and that statistic will likely continue to increase considering their assimilation into frontline military operations. Currently, VA treatment for chronic pain is largely the prescription of opioids with the consideration of a patient's personal history, without the consideration of a patient's personal history or preferences. Unfortunately, there's a lack of data on veteran opioid use. There are also significant inefficiencies in the VA identifying abuse of opioids and with patient follow-up to determine effectiveness of these drugs on a case-by-case basis. The tragic death of Marine Corporal Simkowski highlights just one example of these failures. The PROMISE Act is the congressional action needed to rectify these problems. The bill requires the VA and DoD to update the clinical practice guidelines for management of opioid therapy for chronic pain, as I said. VA opioid prescribers would also be required to enhance opioid education and training to ensure veterans are receiving the true care they have earned and deserve. The PROMISE Act also acknowledges that VA patient services do not stop at the initial consultation. It requires the VA to maintain a real-time tracking of data on opioid use of veterans. This initiative will help the VA prevent over-medication and identify misuse or overuse of medication. The bill ensures that our veterans have the same treatment options as the non-VA healthcare community. While opioid prescriptions work to curb chronic pain in many veterans, it should not be the sole way veterans are treated, especially considering the risks. Therefore, it seemed only natural to include language from another one of my priorities, the COVER Act, within this bill before us today. Title III of this bill opens alternative treatment options to our veterans, such as outdoor sports therapy, accelerated resolution therapy, medication and service dog therapies, and more. I'm almost finished, Mr. Chairman. The VA would conduct a patient-centered survey to analyze the potential benefits of incorporating these therapies into veteran health treatments. The PROMISE Act prioritizes patient-centered health care with improvements to patient advocacy through community meetings at VA facilities and improvements to the VA outreach initiatives. Can I have additional 10 seconds? You mind?
Gentleman's recognized for another 1 minute.
In closing, the PROMISE Act gives us more choice. Veterans should have a choice, not one size fits all. More choice to veteran patients seeking care at VA facilities. Reduces the chances for opioid misuse and abuse, and engages the veteran community in further improving VA health care. With favorable passage of this bill, of course the A&S first, we uphold our sacred vow and promise to our nation's veterans. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment and the underlying bill, and I thank you so very much, and I thank all the members for their support of this great bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bilirakis. I will be supporting his amendment and would ask, is there any other discussion on the amendment in the nature of the substitute?
I have a question.
Ms. Brown.
For my colleague from Florida. Sir, in your bill, does it include medical marijuana in those states that it is legal?
However, we do have a commission set up in my cover app, which is in this bill, to study all alternative treatments for veterans.
So that will include acupuncture and other things?
If that's what the experts on the commission agree to, yes. And if there's evidence for that, there's a possibility that could include acupuncture.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Are you back?
Ms. Custer?
I just wanted to thank my colleague, Mr. Bilirakis, and to encourage my colleagues to join a bipartisan task force on the heroin epidemic with my colleague, Mr. Ginta from New Hampshire. We now have 50 members. And I also want to thank Mr. Kaufman. On March 4th, next week, we're going to be having a regional hearing of the VA Oversight and Investigations Committee in New Hampshire on this topic. We have Vision 1, White River Junction is doing some very cutting-edge research on decreasing the amount of opiate prescriptions for pain management and using alternate treatments, including acupuncture and mindfulness and yoga and exercise and physical therapy and mental health therapy. We've got some great results to share, not just with the VA, but with the civilian community in New Hampshire, where we're having a really terrible epidemic with heroin. 4 out of 5 users started with prescription medication, opiate medication. And then we hope to bring legislation back to this committee on a pilot project for the VA. And I commend you and want to work with you, and I thank Ms. Walorski as well for her amendment about prescription drug monitoring that I think we're going to discuss. But it's a critical issue, and I just want to welcome everybody. It's a very bipartisan. We have 50 members, and we'd love for you all to be involved. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Who else seeks recognition for purposes of offering an amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment. An amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute at the desk.
Yeah, if I have to say it, you have to say it.
I got it.
All right. Clerk shall report.
To the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4063, offered by Ms. Walorski of Indiana.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute be dispensed with. Hearing no objections to order, and I recognize Ms. Walorski for 5 minutes to discuss her amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sponsor, for the sponsoring Congressman Bilirakis for introducing this very important legislation. Last December, in my home state of Indiana, the DEA began an investigation of a Veteran Affairs Medical Center in Marion, Indiana. The DEA's warrant revealed that the Marion facility purchased more powerful prescription drugs than any other VA facility in the Northern District of Indiana. It was incredibly alarming to learn that doctors at the Marion facility didn't have to report to INSPECT, which is Indiana's Prescription Drug Monitoring Program, or PDMP. Most doctors and pharmacists are required to report prescriptions to these state programs. However, current law merely gives the VA the option to do so voluntarily. It's not required. My amendment is simple. It changes the may to a shall, but changing one small word will have a very big impact on what we're talking about with opiate overdosing and prescriptions. It treats VA doctors the same as any other doctors and will significantly improve the tracking and coordination of prescription drugs. These databases have proven effective in preventing drug abuse and diversion and in reducing doctor shopping. Without the VA's participation, there's a glaring void in reporting that leaves veterans already at an increased risk of abuse even more vulnerable. My amendment ensures that the VA follows the same rules and regulations as everyone else when prescribing these powerful medications to our vets. By changing this word, we can increase oversight and transparency over VA doctors and allow us to more closely monitor if veterans are being improperly treated. I ask my colleagues for their support on this common sense amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Walorski. Ms. Brown, do you have a question?
I do. I guess my question, we've had some issues in Florida, and there have been several television programs we're in, there with the tightening of the prescription, cancer payments, patients haven't been able to get their treatment. So how is this? I hope that's not me. So I want to know, is there a balance there?
There is, and I appreciate the question. There's a balance that completely protects the privacy of this individual, and just HIPAA is covered. There's no information that's going to be sent to any other agency other than the very restricted agencies that states have. And I would just bring to your remembrance here, when Sloan Gibson was here just back in December, this is the issue I was talking to him about. And when I said, does every VA, per the law that we constructed ourselves here with that VA reform, does the law says they may voluntarily bring this information into a state database for transparency and accountability and the safety of the veteran. He said under oath, yes, the VA is being complicit. And what I found out in the research that we did, most VAs around the country are not complicit, which is why we're changing this to say you must send that information of these high-powered drugs into a database to just allow, like any other doctor would, another set of fresh eyes, restricted and covered under HIPAA, but just a restricted set of eyes to protect the veterans. I don't think it conflicts with your question.
Okay, I just want to mention that because a lot of cancer doctors have come to me with problems. We got so many authority doctors on this committee, and they have complained that they're having problems with DEA. I mean, so I'm just saying it needs to be a balance.
Absolutely, I agree.
Thank you very much, Ms. Walorski.
Thank you.
I will be supporting her amendment, and I would, yeah, Dr. Rowe.
Just a very brief comment. One, in the state of Tennessee, to be licensed every year, you have to go through opioid training and education. Two, what has happened, we've been talking about this for 6 years, I wholeheartedly support what you're doing, because what was happening is an addict, whether they're a veteran or a civilian, and they're drug seeking. And what was happening was, without the database, right now we can look in Tennessee, it's not real time, and hopefully these things will become real time, so when we write a prescription, we'll know whether someone has gotten one 2 days ago. But you'll eventually get that information. You'll know, you can see that they are. Without the VA being there, there was no way for us out in the real world to actually see that. So
Correct.
You didn't know that patient so I wholeheartedly support that. And also what Ms. Brown has said is absolutely true, is that we do have to strike a balance, because I had a patient this past week that came to me who had severe rheumatoid arthritis, was being referred to a pain clinic because a rheumatologist was afraid to prescribe the medicine that she needed to control her pain. So we have a whole debate going on in this country right now. And I will say that our Surgeon General, Dr. Murthy, is going to produce a Surgeon General's report on opioids this year. And I think that would be very helpful, but it is true that you do have two separate issues here, and we have to be careful about what we do, but I wholeheartedly support that. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion on Ms. Walorski's amendment? Anybody else seek recognition for the purposes of offering an amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to offer another amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
The clerk shall report.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4063, offered by Ms. Walorski of Indiana.
I would ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment be dispensed with in the nature of on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Hearing no objection, so ordered, and I recognize Ms. Walorski now for 5 minutes to discuss her second amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2013, a former Marine in my district who served in Vietnam began to experience pain over his entire body. After visits to 4 local VA facilities, doctors failed to diagnose his condition and instead prescribed him morphine. Doctors also advised him to be sent to a nursing home, only to discover he did not meet eligibility requirements. 2 days later, just a week before Christmas, the pain proved to be too great and he took his own life. While there are many factors at play here, the underlying issue was his pain and how it was being treated. Chronic pain is a serious and highly prevalent condition that many of our veterans suffer from in the U.S. Unfortunately, treatment of chronic pain has been a major challenge for the Veterans Health Administration, which cares for a population suffering from higher rates of chronic pain than the civilian population experiences, and they also experience higher rates of polytrauma and comorbidities, particularly PTSD, depression, and traumatic brain injury. The treatment for pain at VA and DoD has for too long relied heavily on the prescription of opioids. According to the VHA, more than 50% of VA patients report chronic pain, and the demand for pain service is expected to grow by 26% over the next 4 years. My amendment would include FDA-approved or cleared medical devices and other therapies for the treatment of chronic pain as an alternative to or to augment opioid therapy in the advisory committee's review of VA DoD clinical practice guidelines for evidence-based non-opioid treatments. In addition, my amendment would require VA to train employees on the use of FDA-approved medical devices for the treatment of patients with chronic pain. This amendment is in recognition that there are approved treatments aside from drugs that should be considered when addressing chronic pain. We need to ensure that VA is allowed to use all evidence-based medical devices and therapies that have proven to reduce harm and adverse events associated with the misuse of opioids. I ask my colleagues to support this common sense legislation that will add another vital provision to this important legislation. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. I will be supporting the amendment and ask if there any other discussion on Ms. Walorski's second amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on Representative Walorski's second amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4063. And as previously discussed, I will be supporting. Now, all of those in favor of her second amendment will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the second amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4063 is agreed to, and the question now occurs on Representative Walorski's first amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4063. And again, as previously discussed, I will be supporting this amendment. So all those in favor of Representative Walorski's first amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4063 will say aye. Aye. All those opposed will say no. The ayes have it, and the first amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4063 is agreed to, and the question now occurs on the passage of the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4063 as amended. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All opposed will say no. The ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4063 as amended is agreed to, and the question now occurs on the passage of H.R. 4063 as amended. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. H.R. 4063 as amended is agreed to, and I recognize Ranking Member Brown for a motion on reporting H.R. 4063 as amended.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 4063 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor would say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to, and H.R. 4063 as amended is reported favorably to the full House. And I'll call up H.R. 4129. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 4129, to direct the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to carry out a program under which the Secretary enters into a partnership agreements with non-federal entities for the construction of major construction projects authorized by law and for other
Bill has
purposes.
been circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules, and without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. And since no amendments were filed timely, is there any discussion on H.R. 4129?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McNerney.
I want to thank the Chairman for including my bill, H.R. 4129, the Jumpstart VA Construction Act, in today's markup. The VA has made progress on its efforts to reform the construction process for medical facilities, but more is needed to increase access to health care for our nation's veterans. Veterans in my district have experienced firsthand the burden of traveling long distances for routine appointments. For example, in California's Central Valley, have waited more than 10 years for a community-based outpatient clinic in the community living center to break ground on construction. In 2013, 50 major construction projects were under management by the VA at a cost of more than $12 billion. The GAO report found that for some of the VA's largest medical construction projects, costs had skyrocketed and schedule delays threw projects off track. Projects near Denver, Las Vegas, Orlando, and New Orleans have all experienced significant setbacks in their construction. Veterans and their families, as well as taxpayers, are paying the price for this. The GAO found that as of January 2015, delays for these projects range from 14 to 86 months. The costs increased, range from 66% to 144%. This includes the cost of the New Orleans project increased by $40 million and the Orlando project being delayed 39 to 57 months. The VA buildings are on an average of 60 years old. The VA currently manages and maintains more than 5,600 buildings and almost 3,400 acres of land. According to the VA, more than 3,900 infrastructure funding gaps with an estimated cost of between $54 and $66 billion to close, and another $10 billion in activation costs. Additionally, the VA has stated that we'll need around $60 billion to close all these funding gaps over a 10-year period. Moreover, the VA has several major construction projects that are in backlog. 9 of those have only received limited funding. It's going to cost another $4.7 billion to close these gaps. This status quo is not acceptable. My bill, the Jumpstart VA Construction Act, is intended to help reduce the construction backlog of VA projects by allowing for more federal, non-federal partnerships. My bill permits non-federal entities and partners to raise half the funds for major medical projects and to facilitate construction processes. Project delays include major medical facility projects where Congress has already appropriated the funds. The design and the development phase is complete, and construction has not begun as of the date of the enactment of this act. I have structured this bill specifically so that state and local governments, as well as private entities, can partner with federal government to build veterans facilities. The VA is already moving away from managing major construction projects and has proposed having the Army Corps of Engineers lead projects. It's my understanding that, that this matter has yet to be resolved, and I look forward to hearing from the VA about this effort and what progress, if any, has been made in determining how to best manage major construction projects. I'm open to working with my colleagues to enhance this bill, but I'm committed to reforming the process to make sure we are providing veterans with more opportunities to access quality health care. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McNerney. Is there any other discussion on H.R. 4129? Hearing none, the question now occurs on passage of H.R. 4129. All those in favor would say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and H.R. 4129 is agreed to. I recognize Ranking Member Brown for a motion on reporting H.R. 4129.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that H.R. 4129 be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 4129 is reported favorably to the full House. I now call up H.R. 1769. The clerk shall report.
H.R. 1769, to establish in the Department of Veterans Affairs a National Center for Research on the Diagnosis and Treatment of Health Conditions of the descendants of veterans exposed to toxic substances during service in the armed forces that are related to that exposure, to establish an advisory board on such health conditions and for other
Bill has been
purposes.
circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules, and without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. The bill is now open for amendment, and I would ask if anybody has an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1769.
The clerk shall report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1769 offered by Dr. Benishek.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment in the nature of a substitute be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered, and I recognize Dr. Benishek for 5 minutes to discuss his amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1769 makes just some technical corrections to the original bill. 1769, the Toxic Exposure Research Act of 2015, would establish a National Center for Research into the health conditions experienced by the descendants of veterans exposed to toxic substances. It would also create an advisory board who would be responsible for advising the National Center, determining health conditions that result from toxic exposure, and studying and evaluating the cases of exposure. In addition, it would authorize the Department of Defense to conduct a declassification review of documents related to a known incident in which at least 100 service members were exposed to a toxic substance that resulted in at least one case of related disability. Finally, it would create a national outreach campaign jointly led by the VA, the Department of Defense, and the Department of Health and Human Services on the potential long-term health effects of exposure to toxic substances by service members, veterans, and their descendants. This amendment represents the culmination of decades of effort from veterans and their families. I'm very proud of the resulting bill we have today, which will allow us to seek out those answers that our military families deserve. As a doctor who served at the VA in Iron Mountain for 20 years, and as a parent and grandparent, I can't imagine what it would feel like that your service to your country was causing pain and suffering in your children and grandchildren. The lack of understanding into generational effects of toxic exposure is astounding, and it's a problem that we begin to address today. It's been my pleasure to work with the Vietnam Veterans of America and all the supportive VSOs, as well as the members of the Subcommittee on Health, particularly Subcommittee Ranking Member Brownlee, to advance this legislation. And I also want to thank Congressman Michael Honda for being my lead co-sponsor on the bill. I urge all my colleagues to join me in supporting the amendment in nature of a substitute to H.R. 1769 and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Benishek. I am going to be supporting his amendment and would ask, is there any other discussion on Dr. Benishek's amendment in the nature of a substitute? Since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1769. All those in favor of the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1769 will say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 1769 is agreed to, and the question now occurs on passage of H.R. 1769 as amended. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. H.R. 1769 as amended is agreed to, and I recognize Ranking Member Brown for a motion to report H.R. 1769 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 1769 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. H.R. 1769 as amended is reported favorably to the full House. I now call up H.R. 3484, and the clerk shall report.
H.R. 3484, to authorize the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to enter into certain leases at the Department of Veterans Affairs West Los Angeles campus.
The bill has been circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules, and without objection, the first reading is dispensed with, and the bill is now open for amendment at any point, and I have an amendment in the nature of a substitute at the desk. The clerk shall report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3484, offered by Mr. Miller of Florida.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3484 be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered. My amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3484 would allow the Department of Veterans Affairs to carry out enhanced use leases at the VA West Los Angeles VA Medical Center campus. Leases that would be considered allowable under this language include an enhanced use lease for the purpose of providing supportive housing, any lease lasting less than 50 years to a third party to provide services that benefit veterans and their families, and a lease lasting less than 10 years to the University of California if the lease is consistent with the master plan and the university's activities are principally focused on providing services to our veterans. This amendment would also prohibit VA from entering into any land sharing agreement unless the agreements provide additional health care resources and benefits to veterans and their families and require that any funds received from the leases be credited to the West LA facility and be used exclusively for renovation and maintenance. Furthermore, my amendment would allow VA to grant easements or rights of way on or above or under the lands at the campus to local or regional public transportation authorities in the state of California, the county of Los Angeles, or any public utility company. It would prohibit VA from selling any property on the campus and require VA to ensure that every lease on the campus is consistent with the draft master plan. I had the honor of visiting the West LA campus just a few weeks ago and meeting with the veterans, the employees, the community groups, and other stakeholders there. This amendment incorporates much of the feedback that I heard during that visit and will remedy the years of neglect, misuse, and mismanagement that have plagued this historic facility for far too long. Perhaps most importantly, it will require VA to refocus efforts on the West LA's campus to better serve the veterans who rely on this facility, including those who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, and therefore are most in need of support. I'm so grateful to Representative Liu, who sponsored H.R. 3484 for his work. And as I stated during our full committee budget hearing a couple of weeks ago, I'm also grateful to Secretary McDonald and his staff for the tremendous work that they have done at West LA. Is there any discussion on my amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3484?
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Brown.
First of all, I want to thank you. As you remember, I visited the facility over almost 2.5 years ago, and when I was there, I found over 400 units that was vacant that the federal government, along with the state, and the state had not, the units was built with a federal grant, but the state of California had not financed the operation. And I want to thank the Secretary for getting that issue resolved. 400 brand new units stood idle for over 2 years. That should never, ever happen again. So I want to thank you and thank the Secretary for his leadership in helping to resolve that issue. It was also a legal issue. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Brownlee.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for your leadership on this and the ranking members. Both of you having traveled there and to see the facility has made a huge difference, and you acknowledged a lot of leadership around this bill, but I really wanted to recognize yours, and I thank you very much for it.
I thank you very much. Since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on my amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3484. All those in favor of the amendment in the nature of the substitute to H.R. 3484 will say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3484 is agreed to, and the question now occurs on passage of H.R. 3484 as amended. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. H.R. 3484 as amended is agreed to, and I now recognize Ranking Member Brown for a motion on reporting H.R. 3484 as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that H.R. 3484 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to, and H.R. 3484 as amended is reported favorably to the full House. I now call up H.R. 4590, and the clerk shall report.
H.R. 4590, offered by Mr. Miller of Florida.
The bill has been circulated in advance pursuant to committee rules. Without objection, the first reading is dispensed with. H.R. 4590 would authorize VA to carry out and authorize appropriations for 7 major medical facility projects in California, Maryland, and Washington State. It was almost a year ago now that VA came forward regarding the billion-dollar cost overrun in Denver. You knew we couldn't get away without having that in one of our meetings, Ms. Brown, I'm sure. Our oversight of VA's major construction program since then has been and will continue to be aggressive, and our efforts have already led to major improvements in the management of major medical facility projects. However, I do remain concerned about how much VA is spending on construction projects in general and on construction management in particular, especially now that the Army Corps of Engineers is taking on the primary construction management role at many of these project sites. As a result, you will note that H.R. 4590 does not authorize the full requested fiscal year 2016 amount for these projects. Until this committee has clear visibility into what the management costs actually are for these massive projects, I'm not comfortable with writing a blank check, and therefore I have reduced and requesting the authorization be reduced to limit what may already be duplicative costs. We have got to keep a close eye on these projects as they move forward in real time. That's why this bill would also require VA to provide information to Congress regarding current and future construction management costs and agreements with the Army Corps of Engineers for these projects. H.R. 4590 would also authorize 18 major medical facility leases in Michigan, Alabama, Massachusetts, South Carolina, Florida, Colorado, Virginia, California, Montana, Georgia, Maine, and North Carolina. The preliminary score from the Congressional Budget Office for authorizing these leases is quite large, as you might imagine, with an estimated mandatory cost of $770 million in outlays over the next 10 years and $134 million in discretionary costs for one-time special construction. As members will recall, in 2012, CBO changed the manner in which they score VA lease authorizations, which is why the preliminary score is so large. I've decided to include the lease authorizations in this bill regardless of that score because it's necessary that we continue to move the ball forward in these important projects, and I'm committed to continuing the work that we have been doing with VA, CBO, and others to resolve our outstanding lease scoring issues. As I mentioned, I assure all of you that the committee will not advance this bill to the House floor, that is, if it is not fully offset, pursuant to committee rules and House protocols. Is there any other discussion on H.R. 4590? Mr. McNerney.
Well, I want to thank the chairman for this construction authorization. As I mentioned in my earlier statement, a lot of veterans are waiting for facilities to be built in my district and all across California, all across the nation, so I appreciate that. I also want to caution the chairman to not penalize veterans for mismanagement at the VA. And we've seen that before, and folks in my district have suffered from that. So we want to manage the VA. We want to make sure that the Army Corps of Engineers does its job if they're going to be doing it. We want oversight, but we don't want to penalize veterans for mistakes at the VA. So with that,
thank you, Mr. McNerney, for your comments. And just so you know, where it's not a penalization at all. What's happened when we referred or gave the Army Corps of Engineers oversight of major construction projects, they have a built-in percentage of what their management fee is. Well, you would think that there would be a corresponding decrease at the Department of Veterans Affairs in their management costs. There's not. And we're trying to find out why they are duplicating. Now, they are saying that the Army Corps of Engineers is requiring them to have certain on-site engineers and management folks. It doesn't make sense. And we're talking about multiples of millions of dollars. And so all we're trying to do is to get clarity on the issue as it relates to management at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And, you know, I can assure you that this is not done in any shape or form as a penalization to the veterans. It's just trying to get the VA to come to the table and discuss with us in an open and transparent fashion as to what these, and we're talking $64 to $70 million in additional costs. And I appreciate your comments. Ms. Brownlee.
I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this bill forward. And in terms of the facility that will go in California happens to be in my district, and I want to be the voice for my veterans in Ventura County who have been sorely, sorely underserved for many, many years. When I first got on this committee, I evaluated the data of CBOCs and other districts that are similar to mine in terms of veteran demand. And those areas have facilities like this bill will provide for my veterans.
Will the gentlelady suspend just for a moment? We need you to hang tight. We're on our last bill at this point, and we need a quorum in order to pass. Ms. Brownlee.
So this bill will provide a CBOC facility in my district that they have earned and deserved and be well served. And when I first started, the facility was a 7,000-foot facility. This proposal would make it a 40,000 square foot facility, and this is equivalent to what other areas like mine in terms of veteran demand has. So particularly for my veterans at home, thank you for your leadership on this. I appreciate it very much.
And thank you for your leadership, Ms. Brownlee. Ms. Brown.
But yes, the congressman is leaving.
We just got an additional
I
person.
know it, but I want him to hear what I had to say about this bill. Let me just say.
Why don't you go chase him down?
No. I want to say something about this bill, though. First of all, I thank you for bringing it forward, but I am very glad that you're not going to take it to the floor until we have additional time to look into what we're doing here. Now, I am the one on this committee with a little institutional memory, and we had not built the VA in over 15 years. We hadn't built a VA hospital. I don't think it was realistic when we talk about the cost for New Orleans or the cost of Denver or the cost in Orlando. You got to look whether the figure was realistic from the beginning. And so as we move forward, I think it's very important that we bring in the Army Corps, that we bring in the VA, and that we work together as we move forward. I think some of our areas of trying to figure out the cost is a little unrealistic. So thank you so very much. And in the closed door room, we did discuss this issue, and I want us to all be on the same page as we move forward. Now, I was in that meeting.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. Is there anybody that has an amendment they wish to offer? Mr. Kaufman? Clerk shall report.
Amendment to H.R. 4590, offered by Mr. Kaufman of Colorado.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of Representative Kaufman's amendment in the nature to H.R. 4090 be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered. I recognize Mr. Kaufman for a very short 5 minutes to discuss his amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment to authorize the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to sell the property known as Pershing Hall located in Paris, France. This proposal was discussed in detail at a legislative hearing held by the Health Subcommittee on December 8th of last year. At the legislative hearing, VA expressed no objection to this authority. The American Legion, which has a very special historical relationship to Pershing Hall, also supported this legislation so long as it allowed for various historical artifacts and memorabilia to be cataloged and returned to the Legion. For those that are not immediately familiar with this property, by all outward appearances, Pershing Hall is no longer a World War I memorial, but instead is a 5-star boutique hotel, restaurant, and club at the heart of Paris, in the heart of Paris. It is popular in Paris for its open sky restaurant and a vertical garden more than 100 feet high. In short, this amendment provides VA the authority to sell Pershing Hall, and if such a sale occurs, it requires an independent real estate assessment of the property prior to any sale to ensure taxpayers receive fair market value. Additionally, VA would be required to ensure that any historical artifacts and artwork originally belonging to the American Legion be returned within a year of any future sale. The proceeds from any sale and the corpus of VA's Pershing Hall revolving fund would be deposited into VA's major construction account for use on construction and renovation projects here in the United States. Aside from the infusion of capital into VA's construction account, authorizing the sale of Pershing Hall puts two broader VA reform initiatives into focus. First, managing commercial luxury property leases is not a core competency of the Department of Veterans Affairs. The Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee held a hearing earlier this year examining VA's wasteful land management practices after the GAO identified significant problems with VA land use agreements. Specifically, GAO found problems with unenforced payments or other agreement terms, expired agreements, and instances where land use agreements did not exist. As this committee deliberates how best to refocus VA towards its core competencies, I believe helping VA get out of the French real estate market is a safe bet. Finally, VA has consistently asked Congress to grant it legislative flexibility to dispose of its excess infrastructure. Most recently, at the fiscal year 17 budget hearing earlier this month, it seems odd that VA should consider the sale of domestic VA property while the sale of a hotel in Paris is off limits. I'd also like to thank Representative Custer, the ranking member of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, for supporting this effort. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Merci beaucoup, mon ami. Mr. Boston,
Can the gentleman yield for one question, please?
recognized.
Specifically, whenever you say that it is, I agree with the selling of it, but it goes into the construction account. Does that account at any time that they have to use out of that account, do we have to approve what they use it for?
Sure. We always have to authorize.
I just wanted to confirm.
Expenditures out of the construction account, and then it has to be appropriated.
Would you like to offer an amendment that none of the funds can be used for Denver?
Second. That might be a good idea. I yield back.
I am going to be supporting Mr. Kaufman's amendment. Any further discussion? Anybody seek recognition for the purposes of offering an amendment? Ms. Rice, you recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk and ask for its consideration.
The clerk shall report.
Amendment to H.R. 4590, fiscal year 2016, Department of Veterans Affairs, Seismic Safety, Construction.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading of Representative Rice's amendment with H.R. 4590 be dispensed with. Hearing no objection, so ordered. And Ms. Rice, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the most serious problems that this committee has worked to confront over the past year has been the widespread lack of accountability within the VA. Too often when we learn about cases of misconduct, mismanagement, and misuse of tax dollars within the department, this committee and the public are denied the full facts about what went wrong. And too often there is no accountability for the people who should be held responsible. One of the most egregious examples of this has been the ongoing VA Medical Center construction project in Aurora, Colorado, a project that has nearly tripled in cost to more than $1 billion over the initial estimate. Last fall, Congress authorized an additional $625 million to ensure that the project proceeds to completion. I voted for that authorization because veterans in the Denver area should not be forced to suffer for the VA's mistakes, but I did so with deep reservations, as I'm sure many of you did, over the fact that we still did not know what went so wrong with this project. We did not and still do not know the details of what caused these extraordinary cost overruns or who was responsible. The VA has not provided us with that information. Despite our repeated requests, the VA has refused to submit to Congress the Administrative Investigative Board report that contains those details. Even while asking us to authorize hundreds of millions more for this project, the VA has repeatedly refused to show us the report that explains what went wrong and who should be held accountable. We are accountable for the money that we authorize. We are accountable first and foremost to our nation's veterans, as well as to American taxpayers, and we cannot allow money to be misspent without investigating the facts, finding out who is responsible, and doing something about it. My amendment will require the VA to report to Congress each month on the status of each of the major medical facility construction projects authorized in this draft legislation, including information about the status of the design and procurement planning, contract modification management, and cost escalations. These reports will be required each month until the VA provides Congress with the Administrative Investigative Board report on the Aurora construction project. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank my colleague, Congressman Kaufman, for joining me in introducing this amendment and for his tireless efforts on behalf of the veterans in the Denver area who need and deserve this new medical facility. With that, Mr. Chairman, I urge my colleagues to support our amendment so that we can find out exactly what happened at Aurora and prevent such debacles in the future, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rice. I intend to support her amendment. Is there any discussion on her amendment on to H.R. 4590? Mr. Kaufman.
Chairman, I'd like to thank Representative Rice for this amendment, for working, for allowing me to work with her on it to get it in its proper form. The VA keeps telling us that they're going to have the report ready, and they give us a date certain that it's going to be ready, and then they keep blowing through that deadline. And so just very concerned about when we're going to get the report. And so I think that this amendment is extremely important to get that. And last October, the O&I subcommittee, Ranking Member Custer and myself co-signed a letter to Secretary McDonald asking for the AIB, and we have yet to receive it. I think at a hearing 2 months ago, Deputy Secretary Sloan Gibson told the full committee that he was going to order the AIB's release shortly. Nothing happened. 2 weeks ago, Secretary McDonald told me he hopes it will be released within a few weeks. We'll see if that happens, but I think this amendment is extremely important that we do get down to the truth of what did occur. And you know, as disappointing it may be that the The individual in charge of this particular project was allowed to retire, I think, the day before he was supposed to be interviewed by the AIV. And so it's just so important to get down to the bottom of this, not just for our veterans, but for our taxpayers alike. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion on Ms. Rice's amendment to H.R. 4590? Since no other amendments were timely filed, the question now occurs on Representative Rice's amendment to H.R. 4590. God bless you. As previously discussed, I will be supporting the amendment, so I would ask all those in favor of the amendment to H.R. 4590 say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment to H.R. 4590 is agreed to. The question now occurs on Representative Kaufman's amendment to H.R. 4590 as amended. As previously discussed, I'll be supporting that amendment as well. All those in favor of the amendment to H.R. 4590 as amended will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment to H.R. 4590 as amended is agreed to, and the question now occurs on the passage of H.R. 4590 as amended. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it, and H.R. 4590 as amended is agreed to, and I recognize Ranking Member Brown for a motion on reporting H.R. 4590 as amended.
Mr. Chairman, I move that H.R. 4590 as amended be reported favorably to the House of Representatives.
All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to, and H.R. 4590 as amended is reported favorably to the full House. Members, summarizing today's votes, the committee has voted to report favorably to the full House H.R. 4591 as amended, H.R. 4336 as amended, H.R. 4063 as amended, H.R. 4129, H.R. 1769 as amended, H.R. 3484 as amended, and H.R. 4590 as amended. I ask unanimous consent that committee staff be authorized to make technical, clerical, and conforming changes to the bills favorably reported today. Hearing no objection, and I would, as always, ask unanimous consent that all members would have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks to any of the bills that have been forwarded favorably today. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Thank you to the members for their attendance. This committee markup is adjourned.